Hello everybody, this is Sakura Diesel, and welcome to Season 4 of Thomas the Tank Engine Reviewed. It hasn't even been that long, and already we're doing another season review of Thomas. And this time I'm actually excited to talk about this season. Why? Well, because this was one of my favorite seasons growing up as a child, and the main reason for that is the narrow gauge engines. These were always my favorite characters of the entire show, and I'll explain more at the end of the season. But I just love the look on their railway and the look of their models so much in the show. But again, I'm going to be fair and review these episodes in my own honest opinion and try not to be too biased. And as always, if you agree or disagree with my rating of an episode or this season, then that's totally 100% okay. Just try to be civil about it. Also, before we get into the fun facts, I have an announcement about a change in format for the review series. So as you might know, this is the last season, for now, where all the characters are from the Railway series, and with that being the case, I was thinking if I should continue comparing the characters to their real-life counterparts. And after making up my mind, this will be the last season where I'll compare the characters to their real-life counterparts. The main reason is that after this season, there's not going to be too many new characters as the series goes on, and even so, some of the new characters will have the same models as the previous engines. Plus, it's getting harder to say what I think about the models without sounding like a broken record all the time. So yeah, this will be the last time I'll give my thoughts on the models. I'll still give my thoughts on the directing, and there are other segments in the show that I'll be covering as well. Alright, time for facts about this season. This is the first season that doesn't have a Christmas theme episode. I mean, there's an episode that takes place during winter, but there is no Christmas episode for this season. And because of the reverence feelings on the last season, most of the episodes, except for one, are all based on the Railway series from both Wilbert and Christopher. However, this is the last season, for now, for the episodes to be based on the Railway series, which means that this is also the last season, again, for now, where the characters from the Railway series are adapted into television, as the Wilbert has passed away almost 2 years after Season 4 came out. This is also the last season to be featured on the US spin-off show Shining Time Station, which also means that this was George Carlin's last season as the narrator for the US. And finally, the last and this season are the first seasons to feature a new segment for Thomas known as the music videos. And yes, I've decided I'll briefly talk about them after I covered all the episodes this season. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the episodes. Episode 79, Granpuff. Thomas tells a story about Duke the Lost Engine. Wow, what a way to start off the season. I love the story for Duke and the look on his line. It is a little odd to have Thomas tell the story, but at the same time I don't mind. You do see a nice little moment that Stuart and Falcon have for Duke and how much they mean to him. And that ending was really beautiful, with the music and the background as well. Again, like Dirty Work, it's one of those endings that leaves you wanting to know what's going to happen, and it does it so well. First episode of the season, and it already gets a 10 out of 10, a really great episode. Episode 80, Sleeping Beauty. Thomas finishes the story about Duke the Lost Engine, and here we have the end of how Duke came to live with Stuart and Falcon, and it's a great way to end the story. It's great that we get an episode focused more on humans than engines, and the music for the search was a perfect one to use, and it's nice to see some more settings for this season. Plus, it was just so sweet and a perfect way to end off the episode, and it's a perfect way for me to give this episode a 10 out of 10, another great episode. Episode 81, Bulldog. Falcon is crossed that Duke is accompanying him into the mountains. Remember my Season 1 review where I said if you let your audience know something ahead of time, it ruins the surprise? Well, they did it again in this episode. Again, I know some people have already read the Railway series before the episode, but did they really have to tell the audience that Falcon and Stuart are Peter, Sam, and Sir Handel now? They really couldn't wait until Four Little Engines or A Bad Day for Sir Handel to tell you this? Also, remember this because I'll go into more detail of a problem Season 4 had later on. But back to the episode. It's still a good episode. We get to see some new locations, the camera shots were good, and I love the little touch-up they did to Sir Handel's nameplate by giving him his original Falcon nameplate. This episode will still get an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 82, You Can't Win. Stuart teases Duke on him becoming old. The last episode to feature Duke, and it's a nice one to end off his character. I loved the shots in this episode, and the music was really great in this episode, especially when Duke was trying to climb to the hill. Plus, Duke is a troll in this episode. That nice little payback he did to Stuart was really funny. So for the last episode of Duke, this will get a 9 out of 10, a really great episode. Episode 83, Four Little Engines. Skarloey takes over for Sir Handel's passenger train. Now, I'm not sure why Britt and David decided to air this episode first. I mean, yes, it does introduce the 4 new engines on the Skarloey Railway, but I felt this episode was out of place, and you'll see what I mean in the next 2 episodes. Also, I felt the scene with Edward and Skarloey felt too rushed. In the book, the first story was used as a way to explain to readers what the Skarloey line is like, and how he and his brother runs it. This part just feels more like, hi Skarloey, bye Skarloey, and that's it. However, the rest of the episode is still good. I like how they handle broken Skarloey, and I also like Skarloey himself as a character in this season, and how determined he is, and he really deserves that nice ending, and he deserves a 7 out of 10 for a good episode. I just wish that Britt and David would hold on this episode after the next 2 episodes. Why, you may ask? Well, let's take a look at the 2 episodes. Episode 84, A Bad Day for Sir Handel. We meet 2 new engines named Sir Handel and Peter Sam. So now you know why I felt that this episode and the next episode should have been the first episodes before the previous one. While, yes, the previous episode did introduce the railway and the engines, I felt that this episode did a much better job on showing you the railway and the engines. Plus, Skarloey should have been in the works to be mended, but that happens after these 2 episodes. Other than that, the rest of the episode is fine. I actually laughed at the exchange Sir Handel and Gordon shared at the station, and we do get some more look into Sir Handel's character, and him receiving a fair punishment for his behavior. Despite the flaws, I'll still give the episode a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 85, Peter, Sam, and the Refreshment Lady. Peter Sam almost left the Refreshment Lady behind. What a great episode. I've always loved this episode as a kid. It's so simple but very memorable at the same time. I don't know what it is about Peter Sam, but he's always been my favorite narrow gauge engine. Plus again, I understand his worries, but also feel sorry for him by how much Henry got him worried with his joke. This episode gets a refreshing 10 out of 10, a really great episode. Episode 86, Trucks. Peter Sam helps out after Sir Handel is ill. Another great episode. Although it might just be me, but I felt the music in the UK version was out of place in this episode. I don't know, it just felt like the music didn't belong with some scenes, and some of them just felt like they were too rushed or something. I don't know, I might be a bit biased because the soundtrack in the US version is way different than in the UK version. Aside of that though, we do get a nice introduction to Rusty, and another great use of the camera work with the incline, and I love the build up to the crash as well. They did such a great job on the crash. It's one of the most memorable crashes in this show in my opinion, and it crashes way into a 9 out of 10, a really great episode. Episode 87, Home at Last. Skarloey returns home and meets Duncan. A really standard episode. We meet a new and last narrow gauge engine in this season called Duncan, and I like both Angelis and Carlin's voice for the engine. They did a good job of introducing Duncan and what his character is, and it's also nice to see Skarloey back on this railway again. I give this episode an 8 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 88, Rock and Roll. Rusty warns Duncan about the bad bit of railway. Another simple but good episode. I like the character interaction between Rusty and Duncan, and I love a little bit of character on Rusty when he first refused to help Duncan. Plus the accident was done really well, and the shots they got for Duncan was pretty good as well. We're rocking and rolling to give this episode an 8 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 89, Special Funnel. Peter Sam gets... You know what? Screw the synopsis for this, because this is a great episode. Oh my god, this episode is fantastic. Again, the plot is so simple, but they put all the time and effort to make this simple story so memorable. This was always my favorite episode as a kid, and it still is. I love the winter atmosphere for this episode, and the camera angles and shots they got were very beautiful. And again, the story is memorable, and I love Peter Sam's new funnel. Okay, yes, it doesn't look like the funnel in the Railway series, but I don't care, I still think it looks good. I think I've given this episode enough praise that it deserves, so let's move on to the next episode. Episode 90, Steamroller. Sir Handel races a steamroller named George. Another good episode and a good intro of George. There are some funny moments and a lot of burns in this episode as well. I like the rivalry between George and Sir Handel, and the ending was... okay. I felt the ending was a bit of a cop-out because of how quick it was, Other than that, this episode will still get an 8 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 91, Passengers and Polish. Duncan gets jealous because he didn't get polish. Another solid episode. Again, we get another Duncan acting like a bratty kid, but gets a proper punishment for his actions. And the passengers are rightfully cross at Duncan's behavior. I don't have much else to say, so this episode will get an 8 out of 10. Another good episode. Episode 92, Gallant Old Engine. Skarloey tells Peter, Sam, and Duncan about Rheneas. I love the camera shots and the music for Rheneas' adventure, and I love Rheneas' backstory as well. It's another one of those moments where you're cheering him on because of how determined he is on saving the railway, and the ending was a very sweet ending. I'll give this episode an 8 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 93, Rusty to the Rescue. Rusty rescues a Bluebell engine from the scrapyard. Alright, so I have some positives and some questions for this episode. First, I like the look of the scrapyard, and I love the voice effects the team did for both Angelis and Carlin's narration with the diesels. Plus, I like the build-up and the music for the rescue scene, and Stepney's theme is one of my favorite themes from the show. However, I have to wonder on why they chose Rusty of all engines. You would think that maybe Donald would be the one to rescue Stepney because his brother was the one to rescue Oliver from the scrap. It's also weird because why would a narrow gauge line lead all the way to the same scrapyard that standard gauge engines work at? Again, I know this is the island of Sodor, but I'm sure the narrow gauge engines have their own scrapyard as well. So, after thinking about the rating, I think it's fair to give this episode a 5 out of 10. A meh episode. Episode 94, Thomas and Stepney. Thomas gets jealous of Stepney. This is another solid episode. I don't have much to say with this one, although again this could just be me because I grew up with the US version, but in the scene where there's a commotion at the station, I felt the music was out of place for that scene. It's honestly not that big of a deal, and this episode will still get a 7 out of 10, another good episode. Episode 95, Train Stops Play. A group of cricket players chase after Stepney to get their ball back. Another solid episode. It's not great, but it's a pretty fun episode. We meet a new character named Caroline, and I love Carlin's voice for her. Plus, the camera work was good in this episode. Now, I'm not an expert on sports, but why would you have only one ball for a game of cricket? Wouldn't you want to at least bring a few extras since you're playing near a railway? Ah well, still, the episode will get a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 96, Bowled It Out. Duncan and Stepney take over for the Express after the diesel broke down. A nice ending episode for Stepney, although this wouldn't be the last time we see Stepney in the show. Anyway, I really love the scene of Stepney and Duck bringing the coaches to Gordon. Again, it had a lot of good shots and good camera work as well. And with that, I'll give the episode a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 97, Henry and the Elephant. Henry has to help the workmen clear a blocked tunnel. This was a really cute episode. Again, it is a bit of a shame that the story wasn't in Season 1, but at the same time, I'm still glad that they made some changes while still staying as faithful to the story. Anyway, I love the camera work for the tunnel scene, and the elephant model was really nice, and poor Henry indeed. Don't worry, Henry, your episode will still get an 8 out of 10 for a good episode. Episode 98, Toad Stands By. Toad helps Oliver with his trouble with trucks. Another fine episode. We get a continuation with Oliver's trouble with the trucks, and it's nice to see an episode that focuses around on Toad. I think Carlin and Mike does an okay job voicing Toad. They're not bad, but it's not a voice I would expect from Toad. Also, the scene with Oliver trying to pull the trucks, again, it has some nice build-up, and that crash was epic. So I give this episode a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 99, Bullseyes. Daisy shows Toby a thing or two about bulls. Spoiler alert, she's not good at it. Again, I can understand why they originally skipped this story in Season 2, and yeah, reading this story, it does feel like it could just be its own episode. And for anyone that's a fan of Daisy, enjoy this episode while you can, because this is the last time we're going to see her in a long time. And as the last episode to feature Daisy, it's a good one. There's some good jokes about Daisy acting like she knows what she's doing when really she doesn't, and there's some funny moments between her and the bull, her and Toby, and her with the boys at the end. Although since when did Toby had a whistle? Was that in the original story as well? Well, aside of that, this episode gets a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 100, Thomas and a Special Letter. The engines are invited to the big station. For the story they chose to adapt for the 100th episode, they chose a pretty good one from the Railway series. and it's one where I can again see why they would wait a while to adapt. There's some nice little camera shots in the episode, and I love the story itself and the ending. Plus, the crash was one of the funniest and memorable crashes in this episode. All of these good things earned this episode an 8 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 101, Paint Pots and Queens. A queen is coming to the island of Sodor. Okay, before I start, I want to remind you people, do not take this review too seriously. And if you like the episode, then that is great, because I have two major problems with this episode. In fact, I'm giving the rating for this episode right now a 3 out of 10. Now, why do I think this episode is a bad episode? Well, in terms of adapting the story, they did a fine job. But that's the problem. Do you recall when Gordon slid into a ditch or Thomas falling down a mine? That's right, it was 3 seasons ago. And this episode starts with Gordon and Thomas coming home after the mine incident, something that was 3 seasons too late. Oh, and this episode also has a subplot on Thomas wanting his branch line back. But again, during the last 3 seasons, we've seen Thomas on his branch line again and again. And not once during those episodes or during this season did he ever lose his branch line. So this subplot is not needed, and again, it doesn't add anything at all to the main story. It's just there because. And okay, let's pretend that the Railway series never existed, and that every episode was original. Even if this episode was original and was written in the same way, this would still get a bad episode because, again, this subplot is pointless and it doesn't do anything to advance the story because, again, Thomas never lost his branch line and Gordon was not in disgrace anymore. But the other main reason that this episode gets a bad episode rating is that Britt and David, or whoever adapts these episodes, did not bother to make any necessary changes whatsoever. The same adapting team that's made changes to A Scarf for Percy, Trouble with Mud, Thomas, Percy, and Nicole, and oh yeah, they made changes to a recent episode this season where a change was needed. And yet you're telling me that they can't do something so easy, so simple as to make some necessary changes to this episode? Then I'm sorry, but you don't deserve a good episode. You don't even deserve a meh episode rating. It's a shame too, because the episode by itself is not terrible. I actually burst out laughing in the UK version when the painter fell from the ladder. I honestly was not expecting him to actually scream when he was falling down. And the camera work in The Queen's Arrival was really good. I just wish that whoever adapts these episodes would have at least done some absolute changes to the story. And I just can't award laziness. Now again, please don't take these reviews too seriously. And if you love the episode, then that's great. Continue to love it. Don't feel like you have to change your opinion just because of me or my ratings, because to be honest, nobody's really right or wrong when it comes to reviews in general, and everyone's allowed to love what they love. Let's move on to the next episode, shall we? Episode 102, Fish. Duck helps Henry with the flying kipper. A nice step up after the last episode. Not too crazy for the episode, but it still had its good moments, like the night scenes and the shots they got for the episode as well. I also love how Sir Topham Hatt acknowledges that Duck is not to blame for the accident, and the crash was fine in this episode. I'll give this episode a 7 out of 10, a good episode. Episode 103, Special Attraction. Toby is sad because he is not needed in the parade. Alright, I have a backstory with this episode. When I was a kid, whenever I would watch a Thomas VHS, there was mostly a music video shown in the end of the VHS, and the music video was like a sneak peek of episodes I haven't seen yet. And in some of the music videos, they would show a scene of Percy dropping the trucks on Bulstrode. And ever since then, I've wanted to watch this episode, and when I finally found the episode, I was disappointed. Now, I've never read the 2 original stories this episode is based off, so I'm judging this episode as an episode. And again, this episode falls into the trap of 2 stories that have no connection with each other. Alright, so we have one plot of Toby going to a seaside village because he's a special attraction. And then we have another plot of Percy needed at the harbor. What do these 2 stories even have in common? Again, if either of these 2 stories were written out of the episode, nothing would change. So, outside of the great crash, I'm still giving this episode a 3 out of 10. A bad episode. Alright, we're at the last episode of this season, episode 104, Mind That Bike. Percy runs over Tom Tipper's bike. I really love that we get an episode focusing on an actual human. That's very rare for this show. And I like Tom as a character. You could tell that he loves his job and his van. Plus again, I love that we get a tour around Sodor, and I love the camera work for this episode. Although I will admit the story does seem a bit too rushed for me, but I'll still give this episode a 6 out of 10, a good episode. And that is every episode of Season 4 reviewed. So based on the chart, Season 4 had 23 good episodes, 1 meh episode, and 2 bad episodes. So from this chart, it's clear that Season 4 was a step up from Season 3 in terms of episodes. However, there is a bit of a drawback for this season. I still find it a little strange that Britt and David would air certain episodes before others, like airing Four Little Engines before A Bad Day for Sir Handel and Peter, Sam and the Refreshment Lady, and also mentioning that Peter, Sam and Sir Handel were Stuart and Falcon before Four Little Engines as well. Again, Britt and David have their rights to decide which stories gets adapted and when to air them, but I'm sure even kids noticed the strange airing orders when this season first came out. And yeah, I will admit that some episodes probably should have been adapted a couple of seasons ago, but it doesn't ruin the whole season for me. And again, if you disagree with any of my ratings I gave an episode, then that's fine. Anyway, as usual, here are my top 5 episodes for this season. Number 5, Trucks. A nice introduction to Rusty and an awesome crash to top it off. Number 4, You Can't Win. Some really funny moments and a nice send-off to Duke. Number 3, Granpuff. A really great way to start off the season and a great way to introduce the narrow gauge engines. Number 2, Peter, Sam and the Refreshment Lady. A really classic and memorable story topped with some really funny moments. And number 1, Special Funnel. I've gushed about this episode long enough that I think you get the point on why I love this episode so much. If you've noticed, all of these top 5 episodes are from the narrow gauge engines. If that doesn't tell you how much I love the narrow gauge engines, then I don't know what will. Speaking of the narrow gauge engines, let's talk about the characters this season. So, why do I love the narrow gauge engines so much? Well, I love them because as a kid, I've always thought that I was on another part of a railway. Like I found some sort of secret railway with little engines. And each of these engines has their own character trait that makes them stand out of one another. I've already given enough examples of why Peter Sam is my favorite character. I just love his kind but wise character trait. But if I had to choose my other favorite narrow gauge engines, I'll have to pick Rusty, Duncan, Duke, and Sir Handel. The other new characters are okay as well. I like Stepney just fine, and George is another memorable character in the series to me. I love his character and Carlin's voice for him. However, there is one downside to this season. It's that the original characters don't get as much development from this season, and most of it is because Britt and David adapted past stories that they haven't adapted before, which does lead into less development. It's a bit of a shame, but hey, at least they're still the same likable characters from before, so that's a good sign. But now let's take a look at the new models for this season and for the last time. First, let's take a look at Skarloey. So, based on both the Railway series and the TV series, both of them are missing a little cylinder shape on their front side of Tally Flynn. Although it is possible that this Tally Flynn is a new one, but everything else about him looks pretty much identical. No complaints here. Next is Rheneas. Again, the TV series is pretty close to both the Railway series and the real-life counterpart. Although, is it me, or does Rheneas' funnel look a little bit more taller in the TV series? Also, there doesn't seem to be a whistle behind his boiler, and his boiler is much more shorter than in the Railway series, but overall, the model is still fine. Now we have Sir Handel. There are a few changes to the Railway series model versus both the TV series and the real-life counterpart, but the TV series has some changes as well. Otherwise, it still looks okay. Now we come to one of my favorite engines, Peter Sam. Again, there are some noticeable differences. His face in the TV series is more big than in the Railway series, and both the TV series and the Railway series, they don't have headlamps on top of their face, but both of them look just fine. But now let's talk about the special funnel. Now, like I said, I never grew up with the Railway series as a child, and yeah, it is obvious that the special funnel from the TV series is nothing like the Railway series, or even the real funnel that it's based on. But I still like this funnel. I still think it looks good on Peter Sam. But at the same time, I can understand why some don't like this TV series special funnel. Now we have Rusty. Again, there's not many differences with Rusty other than his face is more wider than in the Railway series, but it's a good model overall. But what about Duncan? Again, it's a good model. There's not many changes between any of the versions. They all look real nice. Now we have the Lost Engine Duke. Once again, the model looks really good for him. Although the only weird difference is that his footplate in this illustration I'm using looks a little bit more rounded like. Again, I say this illustration because in the rest of the books his footplate looks normal, but overall he looks really great. Next is the Bluebell Engine Stepney. Now the only differences I've noticed is that in the TV series he doesn't seem to have headlamps. But then again, he looks real fine. Just 3 more characters to go, starting with the Diesel. Again, much like any other diesel engines in this series, there's not really many differences to them when it comes to the versions. They all look the same, and they all look pretty good. Now it's the road vehicles, starting with George. There are some minor differences with George's model. For example, in the TV series, his wheels and the sides of his rollers are painted green, while in the Railway series they're not painted at all. Also in real life, George's wheels and rollers are open on the sides, while they're closed in both the Railway series and the TV series. But I think the TV series did a good job on making his model. Last up, it's Caroline. Again, there's really no differences at all with her model, so all I will say is that she looks good. And that is all the character models for this season. And for those wondering why I didn't include Bullstone in this part, it's because much like Caroline, there's really not that much of a difference in the models. Outside, he only has 1 barge in the Railway series, while he has 2. Also, he wasn't really the main focus of the episode, so I felt he wasn't important enough to be featured in the segment. But anyway, the new models overall were good in this season, and as for the directing as a whole, the directing was also really good. Again, I love all the shots and close-ups the team has got for the Skarloey Railway. They did such a wonderful job on capturing the beauty of the railway, and they also got some good build-up for some of the scenes. So yeah, I could definitely say that the directing was good for this season. Now it's time for the music. Hey, guess what? Big surprise, I like Mike and Jr.'s soundtrack for this season. Although you have noticed in some episodes, I've mentioned that there were a few episodes where the music was sort of in the wrong place. But like I said, it might just be because I'm more familiar with the US version, because there were some moments in certain episodes, like Trucks and Thomas and Stepney, where there wasn't any music in certain scenes, and when I watched the UK version, I felt some of the music in Trucks felt out of place to me, and the same goes for Thomas and Stepney, but the soundtrack was still pretty good for this season. Now let's talk about the music videos. If you thought Mike and Jr. were great when it came to the soundtracks for the show, then they're just as good when it comes to creating songs for the show. I've listened to these songs countless of times, and they're just as good as they were back then. Some of them range from upbeat and catchy to real nice and smooth. It's no wonder these would end up being the best songs from the Thomas fans. They're just so good that even the Thomas YouTube page has done some CGI remakes of the songs, and who can blame them? Another thing I love about the songs is that sometimes they'll take an existing soundtrack from the show and turn it into a song, like using Terrence's theme for Don't Judge a Book by Its Cover, or Toby's theme from, well, Toby. If I had to choose my top 3 songs from Season 4, then I would choose Gone Fishing, He's a Really Useful Engine, and the Island Song. Last but not least, it's time to take a look and see how both Angelis and Carlin did as the narrator for this season. Let's start with Angelis. Again, much like in the last season, there were moments where Angelis' narrations did get on my nerves a few times, but there were still some good moments in the show where he did a good job. I love his voice for Duncan in this season, and overall he did okay for this season. Up next is George Carlin. And like I said, this is the last season for George Carlin to be the narrator for the show, and just like in the last season, he's still a great narrator for the show. He still pushes energy and gives each engines their own voices to match their characters. If I had to pick my favorite engines he voiced for this season, it would be Duke, Duncan, and George. Again, I mentioned this last season, but I've noticed that he had changed his voice for some of the engines he's done before. If you want to know what I'm talking about, watch my Season 3 review as I show a clip from 2 episodes and how his voice for Oliver has changed. Overall, I still think that George Carlin was and still is a great narrator for Thomas and Friends, and may he rest in peace. So, from lots of good episodes to great directing and soundtrack, I'm giving Season 4 a 7 out of 10 for a good season. This is still one of my favorite seasons from the show, and while it has some faults from weird episode airing orders, there were just too many good things from this season that really makes me love this season so much. This show does a good job on taking kids on a journey with its stories and characters that it's no wonder why the show is still going on today. This just proves that if you have the right crew, that you can make a show and even episodes really good and timeless. At this time, I would like to thank my subscribers for watching my work and also giving me feedback on my work and helping me improve my work as well. And I also want to thank you guys for helping me reach 300 subscribers. That's actually really kind of you guys. Anyway, this is Sakura Diesel saying if you guys like the episode, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you guys want to see more TV show reviews, hit that subscribe button as well. And speaking of reviews, don't forget, if you guys got any movies or shows or even games you want me to review, list them in the comments below. And don't forget, I also have a Facebook page where you can follow me on any future projects that might come up for either the main channel or the game channel. The Facebook page will be in the description down below. And if you guys like to see some Let's Plays, check out my gaming channel, which the link will also be in the description below. So, until then, this is Sakura Diesel saying thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next TV show review. Take care, everybody.